The alien queen touched my scar, then whispered, "So it was you." After all these years, this massive spaceship hung in the darkness between stars like a jewel made of light and metal. And Security Officer Kang Junho had never felt so small in his entire life. Stood at attention near the back of the human delegation, his hand resting on his weapon, his eyes scanning every shadow and corner of the grand chamber, and his heart beating faster than he wanted to admit. 25 years he had served Earth's military forces, and 25 years he had seen strange things across the galaxy. But nothing had prepared him for this moment. The Galactic Council had finally invited humanity to meet the Volanthi Empire, the oldest and most powerful civilization in known space. And Junho was responsible for keeping the diplomats. Alive Ambassador Yoon Seo-yeon walked ahead of him with perfect grace and confidence, her silver diplomatic robes flowing behind her like water. And Junho admired her courage, even as he worried about the 1,000 ways this meeting could go wrong. "Stay calm," she had told him before they entered. "The Volanthi have never harmed a diplomatic mission, and they will not start with us." But Junho had learned long ago that the universe did not care about rules or traditions, and he kept his guard up as they moved deeper into the chamber. Alien species from across the galaxy filled the massive room, their strange bodies and stranger eyes all turning to watch the human delegation pass. And whispers followed them like shadows. Some of the aliens looked curious, others looked hostile, and a few looked at the humans the way a person might look at insects crawling across their floor. Junho ignored them all and focused on his duty. But he could not ignore the weight of history pressing down on him. Humanity had only discovered faster than light travel 30 years ago. And in the eyes of these ancient civilizations, humans were still children stumbling into a room full of giants. The Volanthi had avoided all contact with humanity for 25 years, refusing every attempt at communication, and no one knew why they had suddenly changed their minds. "They are coming?" Ambassador Yoon whispered, and the entire chamber fell silent. A door opened at the far end of the room, and Junho felt his breath catch in his throat as the Volanthi Royal Guard marched in with perfect synchronization. They were tall and elegant, their pale blue skin marked with silver patterns that seemed to glow with inner light, and their eyes were deep pools of violet that held centuries of wisdom and sorrow. Behind them came the queen herself, and Junho understood immediately why the galaxy treated the Volanthi with such respect. Sovereign Alindra moved like music given physical form, her long robes trailing behind her, her crown of woven starlight resting on her head, and her presence filling the room with an authority that needed no words. She was ancient by human standards, over 300 years old according to the briefing files, but she moved with the grace of youth and the power of ages. The other alien species bowed their heads as she passed, and even the most arrogant ambassadors lowered their eyes in respect. Junho watched her approach the human delegation, his hand tight on his weapon, his instinct screaming that something was about to happen. Ambassador Yoon stepped forward and began the formal greeting that they had practiced 100 times, her voice steady and clear in the silent chamber. "Sovereign Alindra, on behalf of Earth and all humanity, we thank you for this historic opportunity to..." But the queen was not listening. Her violet eyes had locked onto something behind the ambassador, and her graceful walk had stopped completely, and her expression had changed from polite interest to something that looked almost like shock. She was staring directly at Junho, felt his blood turn to ice as those ancient eyes studied him with an intensity that made him want to run. But he held his ground because running was not something soldiers did. The queen began walking again, but not toward the ambassador, and the entire room watched in confused silence as she moved past the diplomatic delegation and stopped directly in front of the scarred security officer. Junho's scar ran from his temple to his jaw, a thick line of raised tissue that he had carried for 25 years. And he had long ago stopped being self-conscious about it, but now under the Queen's gaze. He felt exposed in a way he could not explain. "Sovereign," Ambassador Yoon said carefully. "This is Security Officer Kang Junho. He is." The Queen raised her hand, and the ambassador fell silent immediately, slowly, as if she was afraid he might disappear. The Queen reached up and touched his scar with fingers that felt like cool silk against his skin, her eyes filled with something that might have been tears, and her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "So it was you," she said, and her words echoed through the silent chamber like thunder. After all these years, Junho's mind raced through every memory he had, searching desperately for any moment when he might have met this powerful being. But he found nothing. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice rough with confusion. "I do not understand. I have never—" "You do not remember," she said. "And it was not a question, but I have never forgotten. Not for a single day in 25 years. The chamber erupted in whispers, and Ambassador Yoon looked at Junho with wide eyes that demanded an explanation he could not give. The most powerful queen in the galaxy stood before him with tears in her ancient eyes, touching his scar like it was something precious. And Junho had no idea why what had happened 25 years ago. And why did this moment feel like the beginning of something that would change everything he thought he knew about his own life? 25 years ago, on a small farming colony at the edge of human space, Private Kang Junho was barely 19 years old and bored out of his mind, had joined the military hoping for adventure and excitement. But instead he had been assigned to guard duty on a planet where nothing ever happened. And he spent his days watching crops grow and his nights staring at stars he could not reach. The colony was home to 300 farmers, 24 soldiers, and absolutely no excitement whatsoever. And Junho had started to wonder if he had made a terrible mistake with his life. Then, the sky caught fire. He was on patrol near the northern fields when he saw it. A streak of burning light cutting through the atmosphere like a wounded bird falling from heaven. And his heart jumped in his chest as the object crashed into the forest beyond the hills. "Command, this is Private Kang," he shouted into his radio. "Something just crashed about 2 kilometers north of my position. Requesting permission to investigate." Static crackled back at him. And then his sergeant's voice came through rough and tired. "Negative. Private, hold your position and wait for a proper team." Could be anything from space junk to hostile forces, but Junho could see smoke rising from the crash site, and he could imagine someone trapped in burning wreckage, waiting for help that might come too late. "Understood, Command," he said. And then he turned off his radio and started running toward the forest. He knew he would face punishment for disobeying orders, but he also knew that he could not stand by and do nothing while someone might be dying. The forest was dark and thick, and branches tore at his uniform as he pushed through the undergrowth, following the smell of smoke and burning metal. When he finally reached the crash site, he found something he had never expected to see. His ship was alien, its design unlike anything in human databases. Its hull covered in symbols that seemed to glow with fading light, and flames licked at its broken wings like hungry animals. Junho approached carefully, his weapon raised, his training screaming at him to wait for backup. But then he heard the crying. It was soft and weak, barely audible over the crackling of flames, but it was unmistakably the sound of someone in pain. He climbed through a hole in the ship's hull and found himself in a nightmare. Bodies lay everywhere. Tall alien beings with pale blue skin, their silver-marked faces frozen in expressions of terror, and dark blood pooled beneath them like shadows come to lifeguards. Junho realized. Soldiers who had died protecting something or someone. He followed the crying to the back of the ship and found Hirsch. She was young, maybe the equivalent of a human child of 10 or 12 years. And she was curled up in a corner with her arms wrapped around her knees. Her pale blue skin was marked with burns and cuts. Her violet eyes were wide with terror. and she clutched a strange medallion to her chest, like it was the only thing keeping her alive when she saw Junho. She screamed and tried to crawl away, but her injured leg would not support her weight, and she collapsed with a cry of pain. "Easy, easy," Junho said, lowering his weapon and raising his empty hands. "I am not going to hurt you. I want to help." She did not understand his words, but something in his voice or his face must have reached her, because she stopped screaming and just stared at him with those enormous eyes. The ship groaned around them, and Junho knew they had only minutes before the whole thing collapsed or exploded. He moved slowly toward her, keeping his hands visible, and when he reached her side, he knelt down and pointed at her wounded leg. "I need to carry you," he said, miming the action with his arms. "The ship is going to fall apart. We have to go now." She looked at the flames spreading around them, then looked back at him. And finally she nodded. Junho lifted her as gently as he could, and she wrapped her thin arms around his neck and buried her face against his shoulder. He carried her out of the burning ship and into the dark forest. But their problems were only beginning. The crash had attracted attention, and not the kind Junho wanted. Scavengers operated in the outer colonies, criminals who picked through wreckage and sold whatever they found on the black market. And an alien child from an unknown species would be worth a fortune. Junho heard them before he saw them. Rough voices calling to each other in the darkness. Flashlights cutting through the trees. "I know you are out there, soldier boy," a voice shouted. "Just give us the alien, and you can walk away. We do not want trouble with the military." Junho held the girl tighter and kept moving. But the forest was thick and dark, and he could not run while carrying her. They caught up to him in a clearing. There were 5 of them. Rough men with weapons that had seen too much use and eyes that had seen too little kindness. "Last chance," the leader said. "And over the cargo." Junho set the girl down behind him and drew his weapon. "She is not cargo," he said. "She is a child, and you will not touch her." The leader laughed. "You are 1 soldier against 5 of us. What do you think you are going to do?" Junho thought about his training, about the odds, about all the reasons he should just walk away. Then he thought about the terrified child behind him, alone in a strange world, surrounded by people who saw her as nothing more than something to be sold. "I'm going to stop you," he said. And then the night exploded into violence. He was faster than they expected, and better trained. But there were 5 of them, and they were desperate. He took down 3 before the 4th one caught him with a blade across the face. And the pain was unlike anything he had ever felt. But he did not stop fighting when it was over. All 5 scavengers lay on the ground, and Junho stood swaying in the moonlight, blood pouring from the wound that would become his scar. The girl ran to him and caught him before he could fall, her small hands pressing against his face, her violet eyes wide with something that might have been wonder. She spoke a single word in her language, and though he did not understand it, the way she said it made his heart ache. Then the military rescue team finally arrived, and soldiers surrounded them, and someone was pulling the girl away from him. "Wait," Junho tried to say, but the darkness was pulling him under, and the last thing he saw before he lost consciousness was her face, staring back at him as they carried her away. When he woke up in a hospital bed 3 days later, they told him the incident was classified, and he was never to speak of it again. He never learned who she was or where they took her. And eventually, the memory faded into something that felt more like a dream than reality. But he never forgot her eyes. The Queen's private chambers aboard her flagship were the most beautiful place Junho had ever seen. And he felt like a rough stone in a room full of diamonds. Walls of pale crystal caught the starlight and scattered it into rainbows. Delicate furniture carved from wood that no longer existed anywhere in the galaxy sat on floors of polished silver, and the air smelled like flowers from a garden that bloomed among the stars. Ambassador Yoon had objected strongly to letting Junho meet with the Queen alone. But Sovereign Alindra had insisted, and when the most powerful ruler in the galaxy insisted on something, even Earth's diplomats knew better than to argue, so Junho stood in the center of the room, his hands clasped behind his back, his heart pounding, waiting for answers to questions he barely knew how to ask. The Queen entered through a side door and dismissed her guards with a wave of her hand. And then they were alone. She moved to a small table near the window and picked up something that gleamed in the starlight, then turned to face him with those ancient violet eyes. "You truly do not remember me," she said, and her voice was softer now, more vulnerable than it had been in the council chamber. "Your Majesty," Junho said carefully, "I have been trying to remember ever since you touched my scar, but I cannot think of any time when we might have met." She smiled, and it was a sad smile that held 25 years of waiting. "You were young," she said, 19 years old, alone on a farming colony, the kind of soldier that empires forget and history never records. Junho felt something stir in the depths of his memory, something he had buried so deep that he had almost convinced himself it never happened. "The crash," he whispered. "The alien ship in the forest." "Yes," the Queen said, and she held up the object in her hand so he could see it clearly. It was a medallion, old and worn, made of metal that shifted colors in the light. And Junho recognized it immediately. "You were the girl," he said, and his voice came out rough and broken. "The child I carried out of the fire. I was Princess Alindra," she said, "heir to the Volanthi throne, traveling in secret to a peace conference when assassins found our ship and killed everyone who was supposed to protect me." She walked toward him slowly, the medallion clutched in her hands. "I was dying, alone in a burning ship surrounded by the bodies of people who loved me, and I thought that was how my story would end." She stopped in front of him and looked up at his face, at the scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. "But then a young human soldier climbed through the flames and found me, a member of a species my people had dismissed as primitive and violent and unworthy of contact." Junho felt his eyes burning with tears he refused to let fall. "I was just doing my duty," he said. "No," she said firmly. "You were disobeying your duty. I learned later that you ignored direct orders to wait for backup, that you went into that forest alone because you could not bear the thought of someone dying while you did nothing." She reached up and touched his scar again, and her fingers trembled. "These scavengers would have taken me and sold me to the highest bidder, and I would have spent the rest of my life as a slave or a specimen. But you stood between them and me with nothing but your training and your courage." "I remember," Junho said quietly. "I remember being afraid, so afraid that I could barely hold my weapon. But I looked at you and I knew I could not let them take you. You almost died for me," she said. "A stranger from a species you had never met, a child who could give you nothing in return, and you almost died protecting her." She let her hand fall and stepped back. And when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of an empire. "When my people came to retrieve me, I told them everything. I told them about the human who carried me through fire and fought off enemies and never asked for anything in return." She turned and walked to the window, staring out at the stars. "They did not believe me at first. Humans were supposed to be dangerous and selfish, driven by greed and violence. But I knew what I had seen." She was quiet for a moment, and Junho waited. "I became queen 15 years ago, and my first act was to begin watching humanity from afar, studying your species, trying to understand how you could produce someone like you." She turned back to face him. "Do you know what we found?" Junho shook his head. "We found that you were not special," she said, and she smiled at his confused expression. "We found that humans do this all the time. Strangers risking their lives for strangers. Soldiers throwing themselves on grenades to save their friends. Ordinary people running into burning buildings to rescue children they have never met." She walked back to him and took his Hands in hers, the galaxy thinks humans are dangerous because you come from a harsh world and you fight like demons when threatened. But that is not what makes you terrifying. Her violet eyes held his. What makes you terrifying is that you cannot stop yourselves from caring. Even when it costs you everything, even when there is no reward. Even when the person you are saving is an alien child from a species that has ignored your existence. Junho felt tears running down his face now. And he did not try to stop them. We avoided contact with humanity for 25 years because we were ashamed, the Queen said quietly. We are the oldest civilization in the galaxy. We have technology and power beyond your imagination. But we had forgotten what it meant to be brave for no reason. To be kind without calculation. She released his hands and touched his scar one more time. You taught me something that day. Kang Junho, something I have carried with me through every moment of my reign. What is that? Your Majesty? He asked. She smiled, and for just a moment. She was not a queen but a frightened child looking up at a young soldier who had come to save her, that the measure of a species is not found in their ships or their weapons or their knowledge. It is found in what they do when no one is watching, when there is nothing to gain. When the only reward is the knowledge that you did what was right. She stepped back and straightened her robes. And she was the sovereign again. And that is why the Volanthi Empire is ready to welcome humanity to the galactic stage. Because you have something we need to remember. Junho bowed his head, overwhelmed by emotions he could not name. I do not know what to say, he admitted. The Queen laughed softly. You do not need to say anything. You never did. Your actions have always spoken loud enough for the entire galaxy to hear. News traveled fast in the Galactic Council, and by the time Junho returned to the human delegation, everyone knew that something extraordinary had happened between him and the Volanthi Queen. Ambassador Yoon pulled him aside immediately, her eyes sharp with questions. What happened in there? She demanded. The entire station is talking about how the most powerful ruler in the galaxy has some connection to a human security officer. Junho told her everything. And when he finished, she sat down heavily in the nearest chair and stared at him like she was seeing him for the first time. You saved her life 25 years ago, she said slowly. And you never told anyone. I was ordered to forget, Junho said. And eventually I did. It seemed like a dream. Something that could not possibly have been real. The ambassador shook her head in wonder. You may have single-handedly changed the course of human history, and you did not even know it. But not everyone in the galaxy was happy about this development. The Korath Dominion had opposed human membership in the Galactic Council from the beginning, spreading rumors about human violence and unpredictability. And the news that the Volanthi were supporting humanity made them desperate. Junho noticed the Korath ambassador watching them during the reception that evening. And something about the way he moved made Junho's instincts scream a warning. Positioned himself closer to Ambassador Yoon, his eyes scanning the crowd for threats, his body ready to move at the first sign of danger. The attack came without warning. One moment the reception was proceeding normally, diplomats and officials mingling and talking. And the next moment a chorus servant was lunging toward Ambassador Yoon with a blade that gleamed with poison. Junho did not think. He simply acted. He threw himself between the assassin and his ambassador, catching the blade on his forearm, feeling the poison burn through his veins as he grabbed the attacker and threw him to the ground. Security forces swarmed the room, and chaos erupted as species accused each other of treachery. But Junho could barely hear any of it over the roaring in his ears. The poison was working fast, and his vision was starting to blur. Junho. Ambassador Yoon was at his side, pressing her hands against his wound, her face pale with fear. Stay with me. Help is coming. He wanted to tell her that he was fine, that this was nothing compared to what he had survived 25 years ago. But the words would not come then. Another voice cut through the chaos, clear and cold and filled with fury. What is the meaning of this? Queen Alindra stood in the doorway, and her presence seemed to freeze everyone in place. She took in the scene with one glance: the fallen assassin, the wounded human soldier, the terrified ambassador. And something in her expression made even the bravest beings in the room step back. The Korath Dominion has attempted to murder a human diplomat in neutral territory, she said, and her voice was ice and fire combined. In the presence of the Volanti sovereign, the Korath ambassador stepped forward with his hands raised in false innocence. Your Majesty. This was the act of a single deranged individual. The Dominion had nothing to do with silence. The word was not loud, but it carried the weight of 300 years of rule. I have watched the Korath spread lies about humanity since the moment they arrived in this galaxy. I have seen you work to keep them isolated and afraid. And now you try to murder their representatives while they stand under my protection. She moved through the crowd, and beings parted before her like water before a ship. You want to know why I support humanity? She asked, and her voice rang through the chamber. You whisper that I have gone soft, that I favor these newcomers for reasons that make no sense. She stopped beside Junho and looked down at him, and her expression softened for just a moment. 25 years ago, this man saved my life. Gasps echoed through the room, and even the Korath ambassador looked shocked. I was a child, alone and dying in a burning ship, and a human soldier who had never seen my species before carried me through fire and blood to safety. She turned to face the assembled species of the galaxy. He did not know who I was. He did not know my people would reward him. He did not even know if I was friendly or hostile. All he knew was that a child was dying, and he could not let that happen. Her voice rose with each word. He fought off criminals who wanted to sell me, and he nearly died protecting me. And when it was over, he never spoke of it because he was ordered to forget, and he thought it did not matter. She pointed at the Korath ambassador. That is why I support humanity. Not because they are powerful, not because they can help my empire, but because they are capable of goodness without calculation, sacrifice without reward, kindness without expectation. She looked around the room at all the alien faces watching her. The Volanthi have ruled this galaxy for thousands of years, and in all that time we have forgotten what these young humans still remember. That the measure of a species is not found in their technology or their military might. It is found in what they do when no one is watching. Medical teams had arrived and were treating Junho's wound, and the Korath assassin had been taken into custody. But the queen was not finished. Let this be known to every species in this galaxy, she declared. An attack on humanity is an attack on the Volanthi Empire, and we will respond to it as such. The Korath ambassador's face went pale. Your Majesty, surely you cannot mean. I can and I do, she said coldly. You have made an enemy today, Ambassador, and you have made it in the worst possible way. She knelt beside Junho and took his hand in hers, and her voice was gentle now, meant only for him. Once again, you throw yourself between danger and those you protect. And once again, you pay the price in blood? Junho managed a weak smile. Old habits, he said. She laughed softly and squeezed his hand. Rest now. My friend, the galaxy has much to learn about your species, and I intend to teach them. 3 days after the assassination attempt, the Galactic Council gathered in its great hall for a vote that would change history. Junho stood with the human delegation, his arms still wrapped in healing bandages, his body still weak from the poison that had nearly killed him. But nothing could have kept him away from this moment. The Korath Dominion sat in disgrace on the far side of the chamber, their ambassador stripped of his position and their species facing sanctions that would cripple their influence for generations. Evidence had been found linking them to not only the assassination attempt but also to the attack on Princess Alindra 25 years ago. And the galaxy was not forgiving. Queen Alindra stood before the assembly, her crown of starlight shining, her voice carrying to every corner of the massive hall. Today we vote on whether humanity shall be admitted to the Galactic Council as full members, she said. And I ask each of you to consider carefully what you have witnessed. She gestured toward the human delegation. In the span of 3 days, you have seen a human soldier reveal himself as the savior of a Volanti princess. You have seen that same soldier throw himself in front of an assassin's blade to protect his ambassador. And you have seen humanity conduct itself with dignity and grace, despite every provocation. She paused and let her words settle over the assembly. Some of you have argued that humans are too young, too violent, too unpredictable to join our community. But I say to you that youth is not a weakness, and the capacity for violence in defense of the innocent is not a flaw. Her violet eyes swept across the gathered species. Humans come from a world that tried to kill them in 1,000 ways, and they survived not by becoming cruel and cold, but by becoming stronger and kinder. They learned that the only way to survive was to help each other, and they have never forgotten that lesson. The vote was called, and Junho held his breath as species after species cast their support for humanity. When the final count was announced, a cheer went up from the human delegation, and Ambassador Yoon wiped tears from her eyes. Humanity had been accepted into the Galactic Council by the largest margin in recorded history, but the day was not over yet. Queen Alindra requested that Junho join her on the central platform, and he walked forward on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The queen smiled at him as he approached, and then she turned to address the assembly once more. 25 years ago, a young human soldier committed an act of extraordinary courage and compassion, and the galaxy never knew because he was ordered to forget, and he did not think it mattered. She reached into her robes and withdrew something that caught the light like captured stars. Today, I wish to correct that oversight. She held up a medal unlike anything Junho had ever seen. A star made of metal that seemed to contain actual light, hanging from a ribbon woven with colors that did not exist in human vision. This is the Star of Alindra, she said. The highest honor the Volanti Empire can bestow, given only to those who have shown extraordinary service to our people. She stepped closer to Junho, and her voice became softer, more personal. I created this honor when I became queen, and I named it after myself so that I would never forget why. I promised myself that the first person to receive it would be the human who saved my life. She pinned the medal to his chest, and the star seemed to pulse with warmth against his heart. You waited 25 years for recognition that you never sought and never expected, she said quietly. Let this medal remind you that your actions mattered, that one choice made by one person can echo through generations and change the fate of worlds. Junho bowed his head. Overwhelmed by emotions he could not put into words. I only did what anyone would have done, he said. The queen laughed softly. That is exactly what makes you human. You truly believe that. But the galaxy has learned that humans are the only species who consistently do what anyone should do, but few actually would. She turned back to the assembly. Let this ceremony serve as a reminder to all of us. Power is not measured in ships or weapons or territory. It is measured in the choices we make when no one is watching, in the sacrifices we offer without expectation of reward. Later that evening, in a quiet corridor of the space station, Queen Alindra found Junho standing by a window and watching the stars. You should be celebrating with your people, she said gently. I needed a moment, he admitted. This has been a lot to process. She stood beside him and followed his gaze out into the darkness. I have a request, she said. One that I hope you will consider. Anything. Your Majesty. She smiled at his formal address. I would like you to stay, to serve as the official liaison between the Volanti Empire and humanity. You know both our peoples better than anyone else, And I trust you in ways that I trust very few beings in this galaxy." Junho was silent for a long moment. "That would mean leaving Earth," he said finally. "Leaving everything I know." "Yes," she agreed, "it would. But it would also mean being at the center of something extraordinary. The birth of an alliance that could change the galaxy forever." She turned to face him directly. 25 years ago. "You changed my life with a single act of courage. Now I am offering you the chance to spend the rest of your life building something lasting from that moment." Junho looked at the star on his chest, then looked out at the infinite darkness beyond the window. "I will stay," he said quietly. And the words felt right in a way he could not explain. The Queen placed her hand on his shoulder. "Thank you, my friend. Together we will show the galaxy what humans and Volanti can accomplish when we stand side by side, far below them." In schools across Volanti space, children were already learning about the human who had saved their queen. And the lesson they were taught was not about war or power or conquest. It was about the strength found in compassion, the courage required to help a stranger, and the extraordinary things that could happen when one person refused to look away from suffering. And in the years to come, when other species asked what made humans worthy of respect, the Volanti would tell them the story of a scarred soldier and a lost princess. And they would say that the measure of humanity was not found in their ships or their weapons, but in their hearts, because the galaxy had always measured strength by the wrong standards. And it took humanity to remind them that the greatest power in the universe was far simpler and far more precious than anyone had imagined. It was the courage to care, even when it cost everything, even when there was no reward, even when the only person watching was a frightened child who would never forget.